Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. So the 1-ton swap's all wrapped up. Everything came out great. Everything's working perfect, except the lockers don't have any air. I gotta get these lockers functioning. I got a trip tomorrow, so I'm actually gonna be throwing a single ARB on this, just like I did on the JK. Now, with that video that I did on the JK with the single ARB, I had a bunch of questions where people were wondering what I was talking about with the factory harness on this, because on the JK I used a relay box. I had a switch pod on that, so it had its own little like junction box where it had all the relays and everything, and I was able to wire the compressor and all the relay switches off of that box. Well, the YJ doesn't have that. I'm not running a switch pod on it. I'm only running the bare minimum for what switches I'm going to be needing. So this, I'm actually going to be using the entire factory harness. And like I had mentioned, the way that this is wired is to where you actually have to power one, like you turn on one switch, that will power the other switch. So you have to have, you know, whether you, depending on how you set it up, it'll be like you have to have your front locker on before the back locker can even be turned on, or vice versa, depending on how you do it. And I'm going to kind of go through it with you guys to show you guys how to kind of fix that problem, but still maintain using the factory harness that comes with your ARB. It's not too big of a deal. It's just moving a couple wires around. But the first thing I got to do is I got to get this compressor mounted. Then we'll start messing around with the wiring. So let's get to it. All right, guys. So I got all the wiring opened up here. Now, this smaller piece, this is the one I'm talking about where they have a lot of that, the issues with the wiring where it kind of separates each locker and makes it to where one has to be powering the other. And this is the one we're going to set aside, and we're going to worry about this a little later because it's what we're going to be dealing with inside the Jeep anyhow. But this is the one we're going to have to mess with, so we're going to set it off to the side. And then this is the battery side harness. This is what's going to go directly from the battery to your compressor, and then also the relay, and it's going to feed off into the inside. That's what the long skinny wire here is. That's what's going to get fished into the Jeep, so it'll actually go to the switches to control everything. So what I'm doing, I'm just going to kind of figure out roughly where I want everything. This plug right here will just kind of sit up against the firewall. I'm looking at like right here, looks pretty perfect to me. That looks like how I would want it to sit. So I'm gonna go ahead and get that compressor mounted there. It's pretty simple. Drill 4 holes. It's got a backing plate, and there you go. It's not too big of a process. Like I said, I did it in my other video. It's not too hard. It's just kind of all depending on how you do it. A lot of people like to do it off the brake booster. That's how I did it on my JK. There's a few different brackets available. I'm just going to stick with the factory one because I'm going to put it right here on the fender, which the factory one is just like I said, has like a little backing plate that goes on the underside of the fender or whatever you're mounting it to, and then the bolts go through, so that way it's got something to kind of give it some support. So I'm going to go ahead and knock that out, and then we're going to start clipping some wires and getting this stuff fished to the battery and everywhere it needs to go. Now with the compressor mounted, I've got everything kind of oriented the way that I wanted. So here's our pressure switch. Now to rotate and orient this, there's a little bolt on the end. You just loosen it and you can slide the actual chamber around. So right now the solenoid's on the back side and I have the pressure switch on the front. Now what we're going to worry about is the wiring. I've already mounted the relay over here next to the battery, so we're just going to go ahead and plug that in first. And we're going to knock out getting the actual battery harness, the power harness that powers the compressor, and get that done first. All right, now we got the big plug. I'm just gonna plug that in. Now this one won't matter what one goes to what side. You're just gonna pop them onto the ends, and that's it. All right, now I'm actually only running one air locker right now. The axle that I put in under this Jeep, actually I had an electronic locker for it. So I'm going to be running an electronic locker on the rear. I'm actually still going to be using this harness to power it. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm actually going to be cutting off one of these actual plugs that usually would go to the solenoid. So that way when I turn the switch on, what'll happen is it'll send power all the way to this plug, but what it'll end up doing is sending it to the back where the locker is in the back. So now then when I get an air locker for the rear and I switch it out, I'll just basically swap on the put on the solenoid, and I'll be able to plug it into this plug instead. So it doesn't really matter which one I pick. I'm just going to choose the one with the yellow wiring on it, and we're going to use that one. And then now all I got left to do is figure out the power. Now this is pretty simple. It's extra long. I don't need it. So I'm going to cut it back. I'm going to stuff a lot of this down because I want to keep the fuse block. So all I'm going to do is get about that much. I'm going to cut it off. I'm going to get the ends put on, and we'll mount to the battery. Now, the last wire that's left in this harness, in this section of the harness, is actually this long, skinny one. And what this is actually for, this one is what goes into the Jeep. We're going to run this inside. And then the second part of the harness, we're going to take that inside, and I'm going to go ahead and we're going to make some adjustments to it, like I was saying earlier, where we're going to fix it to where the switches are able to control the lockers independently. And we'll go over that a little bit more here in a second. But yeah, that's why this one's not hooked up yet. I'm going to find a hole in the firewall, and I'm going to stuff that through. But right now, I'm going to worry about getting the power wire done, and then we'll move on to the next part. All right, so I went ahead and brought the harness for the switches inside. Now, I also got out the instructions because, like I said earlier, it has the wiring diagram for it. And so right here, this is the power that's going to come in to power all the switches and everything. Now, this red wire coming off the pressure switch is going to go up and in. So this section up here is actually this piece. Now, following that red wire, we follow it up, it tees. One goes over to the isolation switch. This is what will shut off the motor and turn it on. The other part goes up to switch 1. Now, this is where the issue comes into play. So switch 1, you got red for power coming in. This little number 3, this is power coming out. So you follow it, it goes through yellow. Now, here's the little T, right? Pay attention to this. We'll follow this down, and I'll show you what I mean. It goes down, we follow it through. There's our yellow going to solenoid 1. This is actually what's going to turn on one of our lockers. It's one of the solenoids. So we come back here to that little T that I was talking about. Well, where's that wire go? It goes over to switch 2. So this is what's actually powering switch 2. So without switch 1 being on, we cannot turn on switch 2. And we need to fix that. So how we're going to fix that is we're going to move this yellow wire, and we're going to tie it in with this red wire. So in other words, we're going to go over here to the harness, and it's pretty nice. It's labeled already, so we've got switch 1. So what we want to do is we want to take switch 2's yellow wire, cut it off, and tie it onto the red wire. So it will have a little T here, and we'll split them into each other. That'll solve that problem. I mean, I could take this harness all the way apart and take it back to where they actually have that junction and do it there. It's just not worth the work. It's put together really nicely. So I'm just going to do it here and just tape it up a little further, and then we'll be fine. All right, and there it is. So see, now I just capped off that yellow wire with some heat shrink tubing, and then move the other one over so they're tied onto that red wire. Now, Like I said, I could have pulled it back into here and kept them separated a little bit further, but this is close enough that it will work fine. I have plenty of room to be able to reach both switches. I'm not running my switches super far apart, so that'll work just fine. And I'll know that one goes to one switch, one goes to the other, and it actually really won't 100% matter which goes to which. The ones that'll matter are going to be the ones that are coming out, going back to power the actual solenoid. So those are the ones that are going to matter on here, and everything off the wiring diagram is actually still going to be the same. So it makes it really simple, and let's get this into the Jeep and then we'll get it done. Well, all right, guys, that does it for this video. Hopefully it helps some of you guys kind of clarify what I was talking about in that other video, and also help some of you guys that might be curious about how to separate the wiring on these ARB kits. I really don't know why they do it. Maybe some kind of safety feature from what somebody told me. Personally, like, I always like having control of whether or not I run the front locker independently from the rear. I never really want to have the front on to run the rear, or vice versa. Like, sometimes I like certain situations where I want just my front locker or I want just my rear locker. So that kind of shows you how to separate them. Hopefully it helps. You'll like, subscribe, comments down below if you got any questions. Appreciate you guys as always.